Mom, figure it out. Not my problem. You're sick, my own daughter said before hanging up on me. I stared at my phone, holding $333 million in lottery winnings, and smiled. Brenda had just failed the most important test of her life, and she didn't even know it. If you're reading this, let me know where you're reading from. You're probably wondering how a 67-year-old grandmother from Ohio ended up with a fortune this size, testing her own children like some kind of twisted fairy tale. Well, let me take you back to where this all started 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday morning that changed everything. I'm Martha Peterson, and I've been buying the same lottery numbers for 15 years. My late husband's birthday, our anniversary, and the day my grandson Alex was born. Call it sentiment, call it stupidity, but those numbers meant something to me. Frank, my neighbor, always joked that I was throwing away good coffee money. Martha, the odds of winning are worse than getting struck by lightning while being eaten by a shark. He'd say every week as I walked to Miller's Corner store. That Tuesday started like any other. I was having my morning coffee watching the news when they announced the Mega Millions numbers. I wasn't really paying attention until I heard the first number 14, then 23, then 31. My hands started shaking as I grabbed my ticket from where it was magnet to the refrigerator. All 6 numbers matched perfectly. $333 million. After taxes, still over $200 million. More money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. My first instinct was to call Mark, my son, then Brenda, my daughter, then little Alex, well, not so little anymore at 20. I wanted to share this miracle with the people I loved most. But something held me back. Maybe it was the memory of last Christmas when Brenda made that comment about finally getting some decent inheritance when the old lady kicks the bucket. Maybe it was Mark's constant hints about me downsizing because the house is too big for just one person. Or maybe it was pure intuition. But I decided to wait. For 3 weeks I kept the secret. I met with lawyers, financial advisors, set up trusts. I planned carefully. And then I decided to conduct a little experiment. If my children truly loved me, they'd help me when I needed it most, right? Even if they thought I had nothing to give in return. The test was simple. I would call each of my children, tell them I needed help with money for my heart medication, and see what happened. The medication story wasn't entirely false. I do take heart pills and they are expensive. But with my new fortune, money was no longer an issue. Love, however, was about to become one. But that phone call with Brenda wasn't even the worst part of my test. Mark's response was somehow even more crushing than his sister's. When I called him with the same story about needing help with medication costs, he didn't even let me finish explaining. Mom, I can't keep enabling this behavior, he said, using that condescending tone he'd perfected since becoming a bank manager. You need to learn to live within your means. Enabling this behavior? I almost laughed. The woman who'd raised him and his sister alone after their father died, who'd worked double shifts at the diner to pay for their college educations, was being lectured about money management by a man whose student loans I'd quietly paid off 5 years ago. Mark, I'm not asking for much. Just enough to cover my medication until my Social Security check arrives. I kept my voice steady, though inside I was already grieving for the son I thought I knew. Look, Mom, this is exactly what Brenda and I were talking about. You're getting older, and maybe it's time to consider some changes. Have you looked into those senior communities we mentioned? They handle all your medications, meals, everything. Brenda and I were talking about. So my children had been discussing my future behind my back. How thoughtful of them. Let me think about it, I said, though I'd already heard enough. But Mark wasn't finished delivering his lesson. And Mom, I'm going to have to block your number for a while. Brenda thinks we're being too soft, and maybe she's right. Sometimes tough love is what people need to face reality. The line went dead. My own son had just blocked me rather than help with a prescription. I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd bandaged Mark's scraped knees and helped him with homework, where I'd celebrated Brenda's good grades and comforted her through her divorce. The lottery ticket was still on my refrigerator, worth more than this entire neighborhood. And my own children wanted to ship me off to a nursing home rather than help with medication. But Alex, my grandson, Alex had always been different. He was Brenda's son, but somehow he'd inherited none of her selfishness. He was the one who called just to check on me, who remembered my birthday without Facebook reminders, who still hugged me tight when he visited. Surely he would pass this test. I dialed his number with trembling fingers. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear road noise in the background. Grandma Martha, what's up? His voice was warm, genuinely happy to hear from me. Alex, honey, I hate to bother you, but I'm in a bit of a pickle. I explained the same story about needing help with medication costs. There was a pause and my heart started to sink. Then he said the words that changed everything. How much do you need? I've got about $500 in savings and I can drive down this weekend. Are you okay? Do you need me to take you to the doctor? $500. It was probably every penny he had saved from his part-time job at the campus bookstore. He was offering me his entire emergency fund without hesitation. And he wanted to drive 400 miles just to check on me. Oh, sweetie, I couldn't take your money, I said, tears streaming down my face. Grandma, you've never asked me for anything ever. If you need help, I'm coming. No arguments. After I hung up, I knew what I had to do. Alex had passed the test with flying colors. But his mother and uncle, they were about to learn a very expensive lesson about family loyalty. That weekend, I bought Alex a new car. You should have seen the look on Brenda's face when she pulled into my driveway Sunday afternoon and saw the brand new silver Honda Civic parked next to my old Toyota. Alex was washing it in the driveway, grinning from ear to ear. Whose car is that? Brenda asked, getting out of her Mercedes that I knew for a fact she was behind on payments for. Mine, Alex called out, dropping the sponge to come give me a hug. Mom, Grandma bought it for me. Can you believe it? I watched Brenda's face cycle through confusion, suspicion, and finally anger. Her perfectly styled blonde hair didn't move in the wind. Hairspray will do that. Mom, can we talk? Brenda's voice was tight. Inside. Now. Mark pulled up just as we were heading in, and I could see him taking in the scene. His face went through the same emotional journey as his sister's. We gathered in my living room, the same room where Mark and Brenda had played with their toys 30 years ago. Brenda perched on the edge of my sofa, like she was afraid it might contaminate her designer dress. Where did you get the money for a car? Mark demanded, having let himself in without knocking. Last week you were calling us, begging for help with prescriptions. Was I begging? I tilted my head, genuinely curious about his word choice. I thought I was asking my children for assistance. Silly me. Don't play games, Mom, Brenda snapped. How much did that car cost? $20,000? $25,000? Where did that money come from? I settled into my favorite armchair, the one their father had bought me for our 20th anniversary. Well, I decided not to buy my heart medication this month. Apparently, cars for loving grandsons are more important than keeping this old ticker beating. Brenda gasped. Mom, that's crazy. You can't stop taking your medication. Oh, now you're concerned about my health. How thoughtful. I kept my voice sweet, but I could see Mark catching on to my sarcasm. This is insane, Mark muttered, running his hands through his thinning hair. Alex, get in here. My grandson appeared in the doorway, still beaming. At 20, he had his mother's dark eyes, but thankfully not her selfish heart. Alex, you can't accept this car, Mark said firmly. Your grandmother clearly isn't thinking straight. She stopped taking her medication to buy you a car. That's not love, that's mental illness. Uncle Mark, what are you talking about? Alex looked genuinely confused. Grandma's fine. We had a great talk yesterday about college, my job, everything. She's sharper than all of us. Son, your grandmother called us last week begging for money, Brenda chimed in. Now suddenly, she has $25,000 for a car. Something doesn't add up. Alex's expression shifted, and I could see him putting the pieces together. This boy was smart, a scholarship to Ohio State studying business. He looked at his mother, then at his uncle, and I saw understanding dawn in his eyes. You called them asking for help? He asked me quietly. I did. I told them I needed assistance with my medication costs. And what did they say? Mark and Brenda suddenly found the carpet very interesting. The silence stretched until Alex filled it. They said no, didn't they? My own mother and uncle refused to help you with medicine you need to stay alive. Now, Alex, it's not that simple, Mark started. But Alex held up his hand. But when I offered to help, you bought me a car instead. Alex's voice was soft with wonder. This whole thing was a test, wasn't it, Grandma? Smart boy. But his mother and uncle were about to get much smarter, too. A test? Brenda's voice rose to that pitch dogs probably found painful. Are you seriously telling me this was all some elaborate scheme? I looked at this woman I'd given birth to, with her perfectly styled hair and her designer handbag that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Scheme is such an ugly word, Brenda. I prefer to think of it as a character assessment. Mark started pacing, which he'd done since he was a little boy whenever he was upset. This is manipulation, Mom. Pure and simple manipulation. Is it manipulation when someone shows you their true colors? I asked, keeping my voice calm. I made a simple request for help. Alex immediately offered everything he had, and wanted to drive 400 miles to check on me. Mark lectured me about enabling behavior, and blocked my number. Brenda told me it wasn't her problem. Those were your choices, not mine. We had valid concerns, Mark protested. You've been struggling financially, making poor decisions. Have I? I stood up and walked to my desk, pulling out a folder I prepared for this moment. Let's talk about poor financial decisions. Mark, remember when you bought that motorcycle 2 years ago? The one you couldn't afford? Who quietly paid off your credit card debt so you could get financing? Mark's face went pale. Brenda turned to stare at her brother. And Brenda, that spa retreat you took after your divorce when you were getting back on your feet? Who do you think covered your rent for 3 months while you found yourself? How did you? Brenda started, then stopped. I know about all of it. Every emergency loan you never paid back. Every favor you forgot to acknowledge. Every time you took my help for granted while planning what you'd inherit when I'm gone. I sat back down, amazed at how calm I felt. Did you really think I was going to spend my remaining years being treated like a convenient ATM by my own children? Alex was staring at his mother and uncle like he'd never seen them before. You guys have been taking money from Grandma, while complaining about your finances to me? While telling me you couldn't help with my textbooks because money was tight. That's different, Brenda said weakly. How is it different? We're adults with responsibilities. You're a college student. Alex shook his head in disgust. No, Mom. I'm a college student with a part-time job, and a grandmother who taught me the value of working for what you want. Unlike some people. Brenda was crying now, but I suspected they were tears of frustration, not remorse. Mom, I apologize if we seemed ungrateful, but you have to understand our position. I'm a single mother. Mark has his own expenses. You have champagne taste on a beer budget, I said simply. And you've both been supplementing your income with my generosity for years while treating me like a burden. So what now? Mark asked, his voice bitter. You're cutting us off? Choosing Alex over your own children? I'm choosing kindness over entitlement. Alex has never asked me for anything. Yet when I needed help, he offered everything. You've both asked for plenty but offered nothing in return. The room fell silent except for Brenda's sniffling. Finally, Alex spoke up. Grandma, can I ask you something? His voice was careful, like he was handling something fragile. Of course, sweetheart. Just how rich are you? And that's when I decided it was time for the second phase of my plan. I smiled at my grandson, this young man who'd proven himself worthy of trust when his own mother and uncle had failed so spectacularly. Alex, what would you say if I told you that your dear old grandmother won the lottery 3 weeks ago? He blinked. I'd say that explains the car. Mark snorted. Mom, be serious. How much could you have won? A few thousand? Maybe 10,000? Try again. Brenda stopped crying, suddenly very interested in our conversation. What do you mean, try again? I walked back to my refrigerator and returned with the lottery ticket, the one that had been hanging there for 3 weeks like a perfectly ordinary piece of paper. I handed it to Alex. Read the numbers, sweetheart. Alex looked at the ticket, then at me, then back at the ticket. His face went completely white. Grandma, this is the winning numbers for the Mega Millions jackpot from 3 weeks ago. I finished gently. $333 million. Mark lunged for the ticket, but Alex pulled it back. Uncle Mark, don't. Let me see that. Brenda demanded, but I held up my hand. The ticket is just a souvenir now. The money has already been claimed, invested, and placed in trusts. I settled back into my chair, enjoying the look of pure shock on their faces. Turns out, when you're worth over $200 million after taxes, a $25,000 car is basically pocket change. The silence that followed was magnificent. Mark's mouth was opening and closing like a fish out of water. Brenda had gone from pale to red to pale again. $200 million, Mark finally whispered. Give or take a few million in investment returns this week. I couldn't help the satisfaction in my voice. Amazing how the market responds when you have that kind of capital to work with. Brenda found her voice first. Mama, we had no idea. When you called asking for help, if we'd known. If you'd known I was rich, you would have helped me? I shook my head. Brenda, do you hear yourself? You would have helped your mother if you knew there was something in it for you. That's not what I meant, she backtracked quickly. Isn't it? I turned to Mark. Son, let me ask you something. If I were still living on my small Social Security check and needed help with my medication, would you help me? Mark's pause told me everything I needed to know. I see. I stood up, suddenly feeling very tired. Well, I think this conversation has been illuminating for everyone. Mom, wait, Brenda said desperately. We need to talk about this. We need to figure out how to move forward as a family. I raised an eyebrow. Brenda, 20 minutes ago, you hung up on me when I needed help. Mark blocked my number. Now you want to talk about family? Alex was still staring at the lottery ticket like it might disappear. Grandma, I can't accept this car. Not if. This is too much. And that, right there, was why this young man was about to become my only heir. But Mark and Brenda were about to find out just how expensive their greed had become. Alex, sweetie, you offered me everything you had when you thought I needed help, I said, reaching over to squeeze his hand. That car isn't charity. It's a thank you gift from someone who can finally afford to say thank you properly. Mark had moved beyond shock into what I could only describe as desperation. Mom, I know we handled this wrong, but we're family. We can work through this. Can we? I looked at him steadily. Mark, in the 3 weeks since I won this money, how many times have you called just to check on me? How many times has Brenda? They exchanged glances. We've been busy, Brenda said weakly. But Alex called me twice this week just to chat. To tell me about his classes, ask about my garden, see if I needed anything. I turned to my grandson. And when I said I needed help, what did you do? I offered to drive down immediately, Alex said quietly. With your last $500, I added. Meanwhile, your mother and uncle, who I've financially helped for years, told me to figure it out myself and suggested putting me in assisted living. Mark ran his hands through his hair again. Yes, we made mistakes. But you have to understand the position we were in. Money's been tight for both of us. Brenda's dealing with single motherhood. I have my own bills. Mark. My voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Stop. Just stop. I walked to my desk and pulled out a thick manila folder. Do you want to know what I did during these 3 weeks while I was planning my little test? I hired a private investigator. Brenda went dead white. Mark took a step backward. I wanted to know exactly how my children were spending their money while claiming to be struggling. I opened the folder. Mark, your motorcycle payment is $600 a month. Brenda, your spa visits average $400 monthly. Between the two of you, you spent $2,000 at restaurants last month alone. You had us investigated. Mark's voice cracked. I had my financial situation investigated. You see, when you're worth this kind of money, you want to make sure your assets are protected from people who might take advantage of your generosity. I smiled sweetly. The investigator's report was quite thorough. Alex was looking back and forth between his mother and his uncle like he was watching a tennis match. What did the investigator find? Well, your mother and uncle have been living well beyond their means for years. The designer clothes, the expensive hobbies, the luxury purchases, all funded by credit cards and occasional bailouts from dear old mom. I pulled out a spreadsheet. Over the past 5 years, I've given or loaned your mother and uncle $63,000 combined. Not one penny has been repaid. We would have paid you back, Brenda protested. With what money? You're both barely making your minimum payments as it is. I closed the folder. But here's the interesting part. The investigator also looked into something else for me. Mark was gripping the back of the sofa so tightly his knuckles were white. What else? Your discussions about my estate. Apparently, you've both been quite vocal at family gatherings about how much this house might be worth, how my life insurance policy would help with your financial situations, and how it would be such a relief when I finally, what was Brenda's phrase, stopped being a burden and made you both rich. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the old grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Alex stood up slowly. You said that about Grandma, Mom? How could you? But I wasn't done yet. The real revelation was just beginning. The investigator also discovered that Mark has been telling people I'm developing dementia. I continued, watching my son's face crumble. Apparently, you've been setting the groundwork to challenge my mental competency. Should I ever change my will? Alex whirled around to face his uncle. Uncle Mark, please tell me that's not true. Mark's silence was answer enough. Oh, but it gets better, I said, pulling out another document. Brenda, you've been researching guardianship laws. Not out of concern for my well-being, but because you found out that if I'm declared incompetent, you and Mark could potentially gain control of my assets as my closest family members. Brenda's face had gone from red to gray. Mom, I never, that's not. Save it, dear. I have documented evidence. I held up my phone. Amazing what technology can do these days. The investigator gathered quite a comprehensive file on both of you. You had us followed. Mark's voice was barely a whisper. I documented my children's behavior toward their elderly mother, yes. Including the conversation where you both discussed how much easier your lives would be if I had a stroke or a heart attack. I set the phone down gently. That was particularly enlightening. Alex sat down heavily in the chair across from me. I think I'm going to be sick. Don't worry, sweetheart. The good news is that your inheritance is secure. I smiled at him. The bad news for your mother and uncle is that I've taken steps to protect myself and my assets from any future manipulation attempts. Mark found his voice. What kind of steps? Well, first, I've had myself thoroughly examined by 3 different doctors and a psychiatrist. All have declared me completely mentally competent. Those reports are on file with my lawyers, along with detailed video testimonies about my decision-making process. I was rather proud of my thoroughness. Second, I've restructured my entire estate. Alex is now my sole heir. Brenda made a sound like a wounded animal. And third, I continued, enjoying their horror, I've decided to have a little fun with my newfound wealth. Mark, Brenda, you're both going to experience firsthand what it feels like to lose everything. What do you mean? Brenda asked, though I could see she already suspected. Your creditors received some very interesting phone calls this morning. The color drained from both my children's faces so quickly I thought they might faint. Mom, what did you do? I paid off all your debts, I said simply. Mark's motorcycle loan, Brenda's credit cards, both of your car loans. All of it. Brenda grabbed Mark's arm. Wait, that's good news, right? Mom, thank you. I didn't pay them off as gifts, dear. I leaned back in my chair, feeling more powerful than I had in years. I bought all your debts from your creditors. Every single one. Mark was doing rapid calculations in his head. You can't do this. There are laws about predatory lending, family exploitation. Actually, there aren't any laws against purchasing legally held debt, even from family members. I did my research thoroughly. My lawyers assure me this is completely legal. Unusual perhaps, but legal. Alex was staring at me with a mixture of admiration and concern. Grandma, what does this mean? It means, sweetheart, that your mother and uncle now owe me instead of their various creditors. And unlike banks and credit card companies, I have very specific feelings about borrowers who consider their lender a burden. Brenda's voice was barely a whisper. How much do we owe you? Mark, your total debt that I purchased comes to $47,000. Brenda, yours is $52,000. I consulted my paperwork. Plus the $63,000 you both borrowed from me over the years that was never repaid. Grand total, Mark owes me $78,000. Brenda owes me $89,000. Mark sat down hard on my sofa. Almost $80,000? That's impossible. Plus the new terms I've implemented as your creditor. 24% annual interest, compounded monthly. No minimum payments. Full balance due in 30 days, or I begin legal collection proceedings. We don't have that kind of money, Brenda said, tears streaming down her face. I know. Mark's savings account has $1,200. Brenda's has about $800. I done my homework. Which brings us to your options. What options? Mark asked desperately. You can liquidate your assets. Mark, sell the motorcycle. That should bring about $15,000 if you're lucky. Brenda, sell your car and buy something cheaper. Maybe that'll save you $10,000. Both of you can pick up second jobs. I was ticking items off on my fingers. That might cover maybe a third of what you owe. There has to be another way, Brenda pleaded. Actually, there is. I smiled sweetly. You can ask family for help. After all, family supports each other, right? That's what you told me I should rely on. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Mom, please. Mark's voice broke. I know we messed up. I know we treated you badly. But we're your children. We can make this right. Can you? Because I've been waiting years for you to make things right. And instead you've just taken more. Brenda suddenly had an idea. Mom, what if we worked for you? We could be your assistants, help manage your finances, take care of the house. I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Brenda, sweetheart, you want to work for me? I kept my voice gentle like I was explaining something to a child. The same daughter who told me my health problems weren't her concern wants to suddenly become my caretaker? Mark was frantically making phone calls, trying to reach someone who might lend them money. I watched him with detached interest, like observing a science experiment. Mark, who are you calling? I asked during a pause between his unsuccessful attempts. Anyone who might help us. Our friends, extended family, people from work. And what are you telling them? He paused, realizing the trap. I'm telling them we need financial help. Just like I needed help with my medication. I nodded thoughtfully. I wonder how many of them will tell you to figure it out yourselves. Alex had been quiet through this entire exchange, but now he spoke up. Mom, Uncle Mark, why don't you just apologize? Really apologize, not just say you're sorry because you got caught. Mark stopped dialing and looked at his nephew. I am sorry, Alex. We both are. Sorry for what, specifically? I asked. I want to hear you say it. We're sorry for not helping you when you asked. Mark's words came out slowly like he was pulling teeth. And for taking your money without paying it back over the years. And Brenda jumped in. And for saying mean things about you behind your back. Getting warmer. What else? Mark's shoulders sagged. For planning to have you declared incompetent so we could control your money. For discussing how much easier our lives would be if you died. The words came out in a rush, like he was ripping off a bandage. I nodded approvingly. Very good. Now, was that so hard? Does this mean you'll help us? Brenda asked hopefully. Help you what? Pay debts you legitimately owe? Why would I do that? I tilted my head. Brenda, when I needed help with my medication, what did you tell me? Her face crumpled. I told you to figure it out. Exactly. So now I'm telling you both the same thing. Figure it out. Mark's phone rang, and he answered it desperately. Hello? Yes, this is Mark Peterson. No, we're not asking for money for drugs or gambling, we need help with legitimate debts. What do you mean? What have I done to deserve help? I'm family. I could hear the voice on the other end getting louder. Mark held the phone away from his ear. They hung up, he said in disbelief. How strange, I commented. Family refusing to help family in need. Who would do such a thing? But I wasn't finished with my lesson yet. The best part was still coming. Mark, Brenda, I have a confession to make. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, returning with a bottle of champagne that had been chilling in my refrigerator. I've been planning this moment for 3 weeks, and I think it calls for a celebration. Alex watched me pop the cork with practiced ease. Grandma, what are you celebrating? The fact that your mother and uncle are about to learn the most expensive lesson of their lives. I poured myself a glass and raised it in a toast. To family loyalty. May it be treasured by those wise enough to value it. Mom, what are you talking about? Brenda asked. Sit down, both of you. I want to tell you about the rest of my plans. I settled back into my chair with my champagne. You see, buying your debts was just the beginning. Mark gripped Brenda's hand. What do you mean? The beginning? Well, Mark, remember your friend Mike from the bank? The one you've been telling about my supposed dementia? I sipped my champagne slowly. Turns out, Mike did some research into my finances when he heard you might need help with guardianship proceedings. Mark went very still. What kind of research? The kind that involves public records, lottery winner databases, and financial filings. Mike discovered something very interesting. I paused for effect. He found out about my lottery win. No, Brenda whispered. Oh yes. And Mike, being the upstanding citizen he is, contacted several people at the bank to share this fascinating information. I was thoroughly enjoying their horror. By now, everyone in your professional circles knows that Mark and Brenda Peterson's mother won $300 million, and they were trying to have her declared incompetent to steal it. Mark's face had gone completely white. They don't know the whole story, do they? Because the story they heard is that a loving mother helped her children financially for years, won the lottery, and instead of being grateful, they plotted to have her committed so they could steal her money. I took another sip. How do you think that's playing at your workplaces? Brenda was crying again. Mom, Mark's job, my reputation. Everyone will think exactly what they should think, I interrupted. That you're both greedy, ungrateful people who tried to take advantage of your elderly mother. Alex was staring at me with something approaching awe. Grandma, you orchestrated all of this, didn't you? Orchestrated is such a dramatic word. I simply allowed your mother and uncle to show their true colors, then made sure the appropriate people knew about it. I smiled at my grandson. Alex, would you like to know what you're inheriting? His eyes widened. All of it. Every penny. But more importantly, you're inheriting something your mother and uncle will never have again. I raised my glass once more. A family member who trusts you completely. Mark and Brenda were about to discover that money was the least of what they'd lost. The trust documents were signed this morning, I continued, savoring every word. Alex receives everything when I pass away. But there's more. I've also established a college fund that will pay for his education through graduate school, and a living allowance that ensures he'll never have to worry about money while he's studying. Alex was speechless, but Mark found his voice. Mom, you can't just cut us out completely. We're your children. You were my children, I corrected gently. Now you're just people who happen to share my DNA and my last name. Being family requires more than biology, Mark. It requires love, respect, and basic human decency. Brenda was hyperventilating. What about our futures? We have nothing now. You have exactly what you gave me when I needed help, I said simply. Nothing. I walked to my desk and pulled out one final document. However, I'm not completely heartless. I've made arrangements for both of you. Mark's head snapped up. What kind of arrangements? I've arranged for you to have jobs. I handed him the paper. Mark, there's a dishwashing position available at Miller's Diner, where I used to work double shifts to pay for your college. Minimum wage but honest work. Mark stared at the job application like it was written in a foreign language. And Brenda, I've spoken to the manager at the local grocery store. They need someone for the overnight stocking shift. Again, minimum wage, but it's employment. You want us to work minimum wage jobs? Brenda's voice was shrill. I want you to understand what it feels like to work for every dollar, while people you love treat you like you're worthless. I sat back down, feeling lighter than I had in years. Consider it character building. Alex finally found his voice. Grandma, I don't know what to say. Say you'll use this money wisely. Say you'll remember that wealth doesn't make you better than other people. It just gives you more responsibility to be kind. I reached over and squeezed his hand. Say you'll never take family for granted the way your mother and uncle did. I promise, he whispered, tears in his eyes. Mark made one last desperate attempt. Mom, please. We'll do anything. We'll pay you back every penny. We'll apologize publicly. Mark, stop. I held up my hand. You'll do those things because you got caught, not because you're sorry. There's a difference. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I tended for 30 years. You know what's funny? If you had just helped me when I asked, if you had shown even basic kindness to someone who gave you life, none of this would have happened. I would have shared my fortune gladly. We can start over, Brenda pleaded. We can be the family you want us to be. I turned around and looked at these two people I had raised, who had shared my holidays, who had taken my money and my love for granted for so many years. No, I said simply. You can't. Because I finally learned something important. You can't buy love, but you can definitely put a price on greed. And you've both shown me exactly what that price is. Alex stood up and hugged me tightly. Thank you, Grandma. For everything. For the test, for the lesson, for trusting me. As Mark and Brenda left my house for the last time, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace. My grandson had everything he needed for a bright future. And I had learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable the people who take your love for granted. The lottery had given me money, but my children had given me something far more valuable, the knowledge of who truly deserved my trust. And that, my friends, was worth every penny.